Navigating your startups is, I think, one of the more difficult things for any Dynasty league, right? It makes or breaks potentially the next couple of seasons as you're getting a league up and running. So I always like to find 4 or 5 guys whose ADPs just don't make any sense to me, both good or bad. So let's start at the running back position. I want to talk about Zach Charbonnet. Right now, he is being drafted as RB32 in Superflex leagues. And look, it's not that I don't like Zach Charbonnet, but currently he is coming off the board as the most expensive handcuff in fantasy football. And look, I understand the upside. I understand what he's flashed when Kenneth Walker has gotten hurt. But Zach Charbonnet is really just a handcuff. He is nothing more. And it may not feel that way because he had second-round draft capital. We now have 2 coaching staffs that have said, despite that round 2 draft capital, this cannot and will not be a 50-50 split when both running backs are healthy. When they're both on the field, or both active, I should say, Zach Charbonnet plays 40% of the snaps. He is only averaging, I'm looking at it, 5 carries per game, 2.5 targets, 6.1 fantasy points per game. That is a backup running back. Kenneth Walker, right, is averaged 16 points per game last season. Zach Charbonnet is not that. Could he get there? And could that be his ceiling if he got the touches? I mean, sure, it's a possibility, but he's not getting the touches. So, like, what's the difference here that makes him a much more valuable handcuff than somebody like Ray Davis, who's going, in the RB 50-ish range? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. I think we're overinflating it because as a community, we all like Charbonnet coming out of the draft. He got the draft capital, but none of that has translated. So heading into year 3, I think RB 32 is just a little bit ridiculous, especially when you have running backs going behind him that are either starters or in a 50-50 split. And while the age may be the main driver here, at the running back position, you're looking at, 2-year windows. You're playing that game year to year almost. So when I look and I see Ramondre Stevenson, Tony Pollard, Aaron Jones going behind him, like in this range, if I'm taking a running back, I'm going to take the guy that's likely to produce this year without needing injury help. Because if I'm going the rebuild route, I'm not drafting running backs in this range of my startups. I'm not looking and saying Zach Charbonnet heading into year 3 is the perfect piece for a rebuilding roster. Right? I'll be taking wide receivers or quarterbacks or tight ends. I'm not going to go running back. So in this range, I devalue the handcuffs even further. So any of those starters that I listed, I am taking ahead of Zach Charbonnet, assuming I'm trying to be competitive this season. Now, sticking at the running back position, but more on the positive side here, I want to look at Chuba Hubbard. Coming off the board is RB19 right now. Now, Chuba Hubbard is obviously coming off of a career year, averaging over 16 points per game, and I don't think anybody expected that. And he is, understandably so, flown up Dynasty rankings and up, startup ADP this season. And look, he was obviously helped by a number of outside factors, right? The improvements to the offensive line were enormous. Dave Canales coming in, a massive help. Bryce Young taking a year 2 leap also helps a ton. And all 3 of those things, kind of feed into each other or play off of each other. But I think the big thing that is really leading to this jump in Dynasty value, aside from the production and the contract extension, is the Jonathan Brooks injury. Like that's the reason I think everybody was off of Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard coming in, because look, it was about to be the Jonathan Brooks show. Round 2 draft capital, should have been healthy to either start the year or very early on in the year. And we all know how that played out. Jonathan Brooks does not get on the field till late in the season. And then when he does, he actually tears his ACL again in December. So now not only is 2024 a lost season, 2025 will be a lost season, and 2026 is probably not going to be great given the history of running backs, immediately coming off of those ACL tears. So you're looking at, obviously last season was phenomenal for Hubbard. 2025, he is the guy with hopefully an up and coming offense or at least an improving offense. And then 2026, he's still going to retain value, assuming he doesn't just crater next year. You're looking at a running back that should be a top 20 producer, even with Jonathan Brooks coming back because his health is an enormous question mark at that point in his career. So there's a lot of things that work for Hubbard. But the main reason I think his ADP is just confusing is there are running backs ahead of him who I think are equally talented or equally capable of producing, but they have handcuffs that are valued higher than anybody else on this Panthers roster. Like, if you look at where these starting running backs are going that are similar in age, similar in production last season, and where their handcuffs are valued, this just doesn't really add up all that much. You have James Cook, who obviously had a ridiculous touchdown rate last season, going off the board as RB14. Ray Davis is RB52. Kenneth Walker, RB13. Zach Charbonnet, we just talked about it, RB32. And then you have the Panthers and Chuba Hubbard, RB19, Jonathan Brooks, RB58. He has the least valuable handcuff. He's coming off a very similar season and is valued well below players that I think are maybe not of a similar talent, but again, produce at similar clips. Now, a lot of this is obviously fed by the offensive environment and in what people believe is going to happen next season. But I think that's where you can take advantage of the dip in Hubbard's value right now. Now, let's get over to the wide receiver position, because I think this is usually where you can find some of the best values or some of the biggest traps, potentially. And I want to start on the trap side. I want to look at Terry McLaurin off the board right now as wide receiver 24. And it may be confusing because Terry McLaurin's coming off of, what is arguably his breakout season, right? 15.5 points per game this season. But keep in mind, that's his peak, and that was wide receiver 16 in points per game. That is his best output since 2020. That's great to see, right? Especially for a wide receiver that is now about to turn 30 years old. The age cliff is real. Like, it may not feel that way all the time, but that is not a number I get excited about. That's not a guy I want to take as a wide receiver 2 in fantasy, especially in a startup. And that 15.5 may feel fantastic, especially because he's tied to Jaden Daniels. That's great. That offensive environment, the situation is better than it's ever been for Terry McLaurin. However, he put up a 22.4% target share. That is the second lowest of his career. He pulls in a 22% target rate. That is the third lowest of his career. And all of this is attached to an 11.4% touchdown rate. I mean, that's unsustainable. It's not repeatable, especially given his career average is 4.1%. Yes, the quarterbacks that he has played with play a large factor. However, I don't think Terry McLaurin is putting up an 11% touchdown rate again. That's just not going to happen. So as he ages here, with Deebo Samuel now in the mix as well, Terry McLaurin might fall back under 15 points per game, under 14 points per game, assuming the touchdowns don't stick at this clip. So there is plenty of room for concern. But if you just take the player out of it, and you were just looking at the Dynasty landscape, there are better wide receivers going later than Terry McLaurin that are similar in age. You have Mike Evans, Devontae Adams. I mean, even Cortland Sutton, who I don't think is as good as Terry McLaurin, but Bo Nix is ascending. He is the clear-cut wide receiver 1 here. I mean, there are ways you can get Terry McLaurin level production without spending up at wide receiver 24. And I think the age is always sort of forgotten with him because he came into the NFL late, or at least as an older prospect. So it really feels like he should be 27 or 28 years old, and he's just not. And I think most people just sort of write that off. So Terry McLaurin is out there. He may not sink you at wide receiver 24, but there are certainly better picks around him and better picks later than him if you're looking for that type of player. And speaking of players that I think are going behind him that absolutely should not be, let's talk about Jaylen Waddle. Off the board is wide receiver 27, 3 positional spots behind Terry McLaurin. And I think a lot of this is driven by recency bias, right? The what have you done for me lately? Because lately, Jaylen Waddle has not been good. Just straight up, last season was a joke. Wide receiver 55, 10 points per game, obviously missed all expectations. However, the previous 3 seasons, right, Jaylen Waddle had gone over 14 points per game all 3 times, over 15 points per game twice. And unlike Terry McLaurin, he is 26. He's going to be 27 towards the end of the 2025 season. Jaylen Waddle is entering his prime. This is about to be the best version of Jaylen Waddle, assuming he's healthy, that we have seen. And the exciting part is everything points to Tyreek Hill being gone. From him tweeting, the peace sign 100 times, basically every single day, saying he is done in Miami, he wants out. Probably a draft day trade for Tyreek Hill feels somewhat inevitable, but even if it doesn't, right? I like Jaylen Waddle, assuming the offense is intact, and that's a big if, right? Tua has to be healthy for Jaylen Waddle to maximize on his ability, because look, when Tua is healthy and throws at least 10 passes, he averages 15.1 points per game. That is better than wide receiver 27. Just hands down, I will take that every single time. And if you add in the potential loss of Tyreek Hill, he averages 16.1 points per game when Tyreek Hill is not on the field or not on the team. And factor in, he also pulls in a 25.5% target share. Like, Jaylen Waddle returns to a guy that could be a top 12 wide receiver. Coming out of his rookie year, right, he was valued as a top 10 guy. That player, that talent is still there. You just have to hope the situation catches up. And it feels like it finally might be trending in that direction. So I am loving the price on Jaylen Waddle. I'm loving the discount. 2024 was not his year. It was not the Dolphins' year, to be very upfront about it, right? With Tua's health concerns. Those are still valid and real. But I'm going to just make the bet that Jaylen Waddle's talent wins out and Tua either stays healthy or inevitably they replace him with another option that is a more of a starting caliber player, as opposed to the backups that have been playing and kind of feeding Jaylen Waddle the ball throughout his many seasons as Tua continues to drop. And to close it out, guys, let's look at Josh Downs. And if you've followed this channel, you know I talk about Josh Downs consistently because, as always, I am a talent over situation type player. And no player is that more obvious or relevant than Josh Downs. And look, let's get it out of the way. This is probably the worst quarterback room in the NFL. Hands down. Anthony Richardson has obviously not met expectations. Daniel Jones is Daniel Jones. You have two of the most inaccurate quarterbacks, basically incapable of taking advantage of what Josh Downs and Michael Pittman and Adonai Mitchell bring to the field. And I don't really care. Look, at wide receiver 44, he's only 23 years old. Josh Downs is just a perfect value because the player is so clearly talented compared to what the on-field production has been. And that kind of becomes obvious when you just take away Anthony Richardson from Josh Downs. Without Anthony Richardson, Josh Downs averaged 14.4 points per game last season. That is with Joe Flacco, who I think, look, he's not the Joe Flacco of old. He is a exceptionally average quarterback that slings the ball, and Josh Downs took advantage of it. If you give him a quarterback that is capable of throwing the ball, just at a very baseline level, Josh Downs is the best wide receiver on this team. I think he was already the alpha over Michael Pittman this season. And I used to be a big Michael Pittman fan, but look, he led them in points per game with 13.1. He led them in target share. He is the number one wide receiver on this team as far as I'm concerned. And Michael Pittman's actually going ahead of Josh Downs, which I don't understand that. He has 4 years on him, just got outproduced. Josh Downs is a much better player than people are giving him credit for. So with all of this flying around, he may not meet, the lofty expectations I'm personally setting for him this season. But this quarterback situation is going to work itself out one way or the other, because it can't keep going the way it is right now. Anthony Richardson is not a starting caliber quarterback right now, and if he loses a job to Daniel Jones, then they're going for a quarterback in 2025 and in a much, much better quarterback class. So there's pieces that are out there that are just kind of moving around that I think make Josh Downs interesting, even if he may not skyrocket in value after this year. And I've already said, right, I'll take him over Michael Pittman. You have Jaden Reed, who, got outperformed by Josh Downs this season with worse quarterback play, with a better wide receiver room. I think Michael Pittman's better than anybody that Green Bay currently has. And I think that's just an easy choice. And then Jerry Jeudy got the Jameis bump. I think without Jameis, things probably come back to earth a little bit, maybe Joe Flacco. But I think Josh Downs is a better player. He's a couple years younger as well, so I'll take him. given that the quarterback situation for both is very much up in the air still.